Let's take some supporter questions. We're going to kick off with this one, and we had a bunch of them, by the way. We'll kick off with this one from Darjarko in brackets Dan. Happy half fortnight, lads. So Cerny opened his secret lab door. The Amethyst special source will have quote-unquote radiant scores, quote-unquote universal compressions, and let's not forget last week's news that RDNA 5 will have hardware acceleration for DGF. I'm getting confused. Is this redstone, an amethyst stone, or even a green stone? Will we soon be basking in the radiance of these seemingly about-face decisions? I don't think they're about-face. It says to me like there's a broad direction of travel with everything heading towards balancing rasterization and the increasing demands there with really exciting stuff that's happening with ray tracing and machine learning. I think what's really interesting from my perspective is, I think in the last Amethyst video that went out, Mark was talking about AMD producing this stuff for the PC market relatively swiftly, which I guess is RDNA 5, whereas for PlayStation, and he reiterated it in this video, it's actually a few years off. What fascinates me is the level of cooperation that's happening over multiple years to get this off the ground. And it is seemingly about, I don't know, I just think that this partnership is absolutely fascinating because I think, obviously, Sony getting more involved in hardware design and helping out on the software side and on the conceptual side, it's hugely valuable to AMD, where it's really felt kind of lacking in recent years. Whereas, and they also, of course, get to move, get into the ground floor, so to speak, on the hardware designs that they'll need, as opposed to sort of dipping into the AMD roadmap. John, any thoughts?
Man, this is the future they wanted with the cell processor, right?
Right.
Get down on the ground floor, throw it in some refrigerators. No, so actually, the thought that came to mind actually goes back when you were talking. You were like, "Oh, Cerny said it won't be ready for a few years or so." If we take that at face value, that's 2029. That's a 9-year console cycle, which is interesting.
Or an 8-year one.
What do you mean?
The consoles came out in 2020, right? And a few years can mean 2028 from now.
Yes, that's like 3 years, but yes, okay. But yes, it could be. That's a very long cycle, and it got me thinking about where does that handheld fit into this?
Right. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there's been all these rumors about the handheld now, right? So I'm wondering, could we see that handheld perhaps release, like, I don't know, next year?
Right.
Something after that? I don't know. But like in the near future, imagine you have a handheld that also sort of works with PS5 class software, like we've kind of discussed as a possibility. I don't know, that makes an interesting sort of like way to continue the generation forward.
Yeah.
Because we're also at this part though where like having software ready has become the actual bottleneck for any hardware at this point, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like we're deep into the PS5 cycle, yet we're still years away from like an actual like Naughty Dog game releasing on PlayStation 5.
Yes.
Like it's honestly nuts. So like let's say they get Intergalactic, I think it was called. If they get that out, when does the next Naughty Dog game hit?
Right.
It's like it just creates this, we're in this weird cycle where it's taking it so long to make these games now that the games themselves are kind of like changing just the way, like they're too slow for the hardware cycle, it feels like, which also kind of makes me wonder if like this whole 2028, 2029, even 2030 release time period for PS6, even though it seems extra long, kind of makes more sense now when given that.
Mm-hmm.
So like hardware in general just isn't the big bottleneck anymore, right?
I certainly concur with John there, but I should chime in here with just a little bit of information from Notorious Leaker, as we mentioned earlier, Kepler_L2. He says the current plans for PS6 are 2027, but he says they may slip. So,
all right.
So you guess, at this point they're talking about hardware only existing in simulation. Then you got like tape out for A0. That's probably some time away. A1 still looking further out. If that goes well, early dev kits, like you'd think maybe 2027 would be their earliest. So maybe it'll get pushed into 28. Who knows at this point? But that is kind of an interesting element of it where I do agree the hardware cycle, even a 7-year hardware cycle, historically, this is a slow console cycle. 7 years was not the norm
Right.
for a long time in the early era. You know, certainly in the 2D era, in the early 3D era, that was not the norm. So to have a 7-year console cycle and to be talking about Naughty Dog, who shipped, I mean, geez, how many games they ship on PS3? 4 games, I think? Uncharted 1, 2, 3, and The Last of Us?
Last of Us. And then on PS4, they did Uncharted 4. They did the second, what was it called? The second Uncharted 4 based game, which is kind of amazing. And then they
Lost
did
Legacy,
Last of Us 2.
I think, right?
Lost Legacy. So they basically did 3 games last gen. This far, they contributed to The Last of Us Part 1, but that's basically like a remake kind of thing. So we haven't had any new title from them yet.
Yeah, that's pretty extraordinary sitting here. Maybe we'll get one game 6 or 7 years into PS5, and then all of a sudden we're talking about, okay, 2034, 2035 for their swan song for PS6, their only title, their singleton for PS6. I mean, that's an extraordinary pace, but I'd certainly agree that's a serious issue, and hopefully that'll be overcome
also,
at
I mean,
some
you
point.
got like there's Ben Studio, hasn't done anything yet this generation, right?
Well, Days Gone Remastered.
I mean, slow clap.
I think maybe part of the issue here in both cases is that they were on the games as a service tip, which didn't pan out.
Right.
And a lot, basically man years and huge amounts of millions of dollars just disappeared because of that. Let's get back on topic. Another supporter question here. Dudley the Gentleman asks, good day, fellow stutter strugglers, ! What features or performance do quote-unquote neural arrays unlock that dedicated tensor cores don't? Are these technologies complementary, the same, or orthogonal in functional usage? Well, they're talking about compute units. So neural arrays are basically a new way of coordinating those compute units to do ML-related tasks. So it's not really a tensor core as such. It's I don't know. It seems to me, John, that there's quite a lot of area efficient stuff that AMD does, whereas, in order to get the most out of the silicon, whereas NVIDIA tend to concentrate more on dedicated hardware. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Let's go on to this one from Sheddy 1982 Rome. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, gents! ! With the interview between Mark Cerny and the head of AMD discussing the new technology that will be inside the PS6. Does that mean that they have basically given up on the PS5 Pro? Thanks in advance. I think that, this is years away, the stuff that was being discussed here. So a game that has a lot of effort put into it on PlayStation 5 will have the additional engineering put into it on PlayStation 5 Pro. So I don't think that's really a problem at all.
No, I mean, PS5 Pro occupies the same space as PS4 Pro, I would say, really. It's just, it's a complementary machine.
And there's like next-gen PSSR based on FSR4, based on that neural network. There's some good stuff going on there. I don't think that they're abandoning it.
There's research that was done for PS5 Pro that, is useful going forward.
I'm sure.
As well.
Okay.